The three L's that we're talking about are lounge, listen, and link. And we've talked about the first one. Now we're on to the second one, to listen. When you're in a friendship, it's the worst kind of friendship when only one person does all of the talking. And maybe you've had friends like that, where they come to you and they talk and they talk and they talk and they talk and they talk, and you're just waiting for your chance to say something, like, just take a breath, my friend, or something. Just let me get a word in too. Well, when we're talking to God, we also need to do a lot of listening as well, because it is a friendship. The primary way that we listen to God is through the Bible. The Bible is complicated, though, and you may feel that the Bible is slightly overwhelming. I know that when I first experienced what the Bible really was, I was lost, I was confused. I went to the Old Testament, read something about a guy named Abraham that I didn't understand, about a ram and sacrifices and what's going on here. I don't know. And then I skipped to the middle, lots of poetry. I just was not following it. And then the book of Revelation, well, good grief. That's complicated. The Bible isn't a book. The Bible is a miracle. You could almost consider it a library. And one of the things that makes the Bible very, very complicated is this little fact. I think a lot of Christians know it, but they don't often say it. At least they won't say it like this. The Bible starts in the middle. Like, how complicated is that? You know, for some people, for some adults, particularly adults, when they're new to the faith, when they're trying to get their head into who Jesus is and they're trying to sort things out, they go to the Bible and they'll start with Genesis. And they'll go all the way to Deuteronomy, and they won't really understand any of that because there's lots of nonsense in there about how bad people are. And they're saying to themselves, well, I thought this was supposed to be a good book about God. And then they get past that and say, well, I'm just lost. And if that was your experience, I am so sorry. It starts in the middle. When I first began reading as a teenager, thankfully, you know, teenagers, when I was a teenager, I wasn't, I guess, as smart as I am now. And I wasn't as great a reader as I am now, perhaps. And so when I was a teenager, my experience was I went to the New Testament because it was shorter, and I went for all of those books that were the very, very shortest, like Philemon and maybe Titus and maybe Jude. I read all those short letters, and I said, okay, now what do I do? Well, I went to my pastor, my youth pastor at the time, and said, youth pastor, you got to help me out with this. I know that to listen to God, I need to read my Bible, but I need some guidance here. And he said, you know, start with the book of Mark. Read the book of Mark 20 times and then move on. And that's exactly what I did. I went to the book of Mark and I read it and read it and read it and read it. And I honestly don't know if I got to 20 times, but I know that I read it so much that I could almost say the whole thing by memory. I knew Jesus, at least the representation of Jesus, from the Gospel of Mark, and that's what I'd like to encourage you to do. Well, maybe not read the book of Mark, the letter of Mark, the Gospel of Mark 20 times, but I would like you to start in the book of Mark. In the middle of the Bible are 4 books called the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew is the story of Jesus' life and death and resurrection as it was told to Jewish people. The writer of Matthew wanted to appeal to Jewish people, saying that this is the person that the Old Testament was telling was going to come. Matthew's a great book, but if you're just starting out, that might be a little too complicated for you because there's a lot of Old Testament references in there. The book of Luke, wonderful book. Luke was a doctor, and as you're reading the book of Luke, you can almost finish every single paragraph or every single passage by saying, including the phrase, "This I have verified and have proven to be correct." Because Luke was a doctor and he wanted to make sure the story was right, but it's also a really long book. I've chosen the book of Mark because it's short, it's concise, it's the quickest to get to. Not a lot of knowledge is needed about the Old Testament. You can just get into the book of Mark and get out of it. You know, it would take you, if you're a good reader, it'd take you about an hour and a half to read. If you're not a good reader, it might take you 3-4 hours to read. It's a short book, and it really concisely tells you the story of Jesus. Would you please start in the book of Mark? The Gospels, there's 4 Gospels in there. They're all written about the story of Jesus. After the Gospels and after the book of Acts, we get to something called letters. Through the New Testament, there's a lot of letters in there telling us about who Jesus is and telling us about how to practically live out our friendship with Jesus. When you're done the book of Mark, and I know it's going to be more complicated, and I know that there's going to be a big gap in between Mark and the book of Romans, but I would ask you, when you're done the book of Mark, perhaps the next book you would like to go to is the book of Romans, or the letter, I should say, of Romans. Because the letter of Romans was written to a group of people who had no Bibles. They were in the heart of the Roman Empire. They were under persecution and practically in hiding. So there's not a lot of Christian material around that area. And the Apostle Paul really wanted to get there and really wanted to teach the people who Jesus was. And so what he did is he wrote the letter of Romans. The letter of Romans is the only really Christianity 101 that we have in the New Testament. It almost stands alone like a Bible unto itself. It doesn't, but it's the only book that almost does. So after you've done the book of Mark, please read that a few times. Get to know the story of Jesus. And if you're ready to move on, go to the book of Romans. Would you please listen to God? And would you please remember the primary way to listen to God is through the Bible. If you will spend some time reading the Bible, and you don't have to read it. It could be listening to the Bible. I love audiobooks. I listen to audiobooks of the Bible all the time. I love them. So you can read it, you can listen to it. There's also no weight of length here. If you're a good reader, you go ahead and read it. If you're not a good reader, read a chapter. If you're not that good of a reader, read a passage. There's no scare tactics here. There's no obligation to do a certain amount here. It's about you. You take it at your speed. You go exactly as you need to go, and don't feel pressured to do something that's way more than you have the capacity to. So let me just encourage you, before you get to the next video, take some time listening to God. Open up your Bible, go to the book of Mark, read something in the book of Mark, so that you will begin your journey of listening to God in the context of a friendship. Thank you.